Alright, today I'm going to go over a mess of lines that are attached around this engine on the Kawasaki Prairie 400. I have a couple questions on how these lines are routed, where they go, so I was just going to go over a couple of those things. Now we've got a vent line that is here. This is kind of what started out as a clear line. A lot of times they turn this yellowish orange and goes from the side of the carburetor, a black nipple there, and it just runs along this frame here and then just sits in this frame. So essentially all this does is sits there. This frame, the hole there, all it does is hold that line in place. So that is just a vent line there. Our choke cable goes down here. It runs along the frame as well, and you can see I started to take it out there. It runs up through the frame. There's a cover here, and it runs up along these connectors here through the handlebar cover there and runs up to here, up to the switch here. So that is the choke cable. Throttle cable kind of has the same thing. It comes in over here. There's a black cap that covers this carburetor. This one runs along the bottom of that fuel tank and then runs up through the frame, up kind of the same area again, through that throttle, the steering cover there, and up to the thumb throttle. Fuel line here coming from the fuel tank, and this one goes down. I'm gonna hop down here, and this one goes down into the side of the carburetor. This is obviously the left-hand side. We've got your primer plug here, and then this I think is where there's a lot of question. This is the coolant line that runs here, and it runs all the way from this coolant line here. Your water pump is in here, so this coolant will run in through these lines. This one goes into the cylinder to cool that cylinder. You can see that there. And then this smaller line goes up. There is a connector here. This is a filter. Goes through here. And the bottom of the carburetor, which you don't typically see coolant lines running through the bottom of the carburetor, but there's a T right here that sits on the bottom of the carburetor. And that is a joint for your coolant line. Runs and just so that coolant line, adjust so you can see it a little bit better, runs through the bottom T there. It runs into this line here where you've got that connector there, and that switch angles, and then it runs from here, goes up into the bottom of the cylinder head. This is your temperature sensor here, and then you have your thermostat in here. So that's the coolant line there that sits on the bottom of the carburetor. On the bottom of the carburetor is a nipple that just goes straight down, sits right on top of that starter. That's got a vent line that runs down, and it's supposed to have that vent line is melted off, but that overflow line runs from the bottom of that carburetor, runs along down here, right beside the coolant reservoir there, and then out to the bottom of the motor. You want to make sure that there is a line hooked up there, because if your four-wheeler's bouncing around, fuel sloshing out the bottom of that nipple there, it's going to sit directly on that motor. That motor heats up, gets hot, could potentially start a fire. Or if there's spark from, say, this connector here that going to the starter, then that could potentially cause an explosion. That cable that runs on top of the starter there will run up and attached to these lines here, run back, and it goes to the starter solenoid. So that'll go from the starter solenoid down to the starter there. Here is your idle screw here. There's a tab that this idle screw sits in that is connected to the motor there, and it just sits down in there. Sometimes that'll bounce out of place, but a lot of times it's at a good enough angle to where it doesn't. So you just know right down there beside your coolant reservoir that idle screw is. Got your coolant reservoir here. There's a couple different lines that are involved with this. This top one here is just a vent, so your coolant system heats up. A lot of times that coolant level will rise, so that air's got to go somewhere. The air's sitting in there, and it'll just go out that vent line there. Sometimes you will have, if you overflow your coolant level up there, or maybe I've seen before where coolant has just seeped out the top of this vent line and ran out the bottom. If you're overflowing it somewhere else, pressure is building up. Coolant here, you have your thermostat here, and this line runs all the way to the right-hand side of that radiator. You can see that there. And then this line runs from the left-hand side of the radiator, runs over down into your water pump assembly here. And that's kind of where we started this video at. So that is, there's another vent line here, and this is attached to a duct that runs along here, and I already took that off so we could see a little bit better. But this larger hose here is connected to the crankcase, also connected to that duct that runs here. So it's sitting on the back. You can't see it really well when this duct is here, and so that's a vent that vents out from the bottom of the air box, vents this. It's an intake, and also has to do with the crankcase vents. So we've got a couple sensors on the top here by this coolant reservoir, and those lines just run along behind there, and I believe that is most of the cables and lines that run around your engine area here. So if you have questions, let me know. I can do more videos on these lines. You got oil lines here. If somebody wants videos done on that, I can do those as well. So contact me in the comments below if you like these videos. If you want to see more of something, just let me know. Thanks a lot.